thank you for that. Children look quite happy. I'm not allowed to be asking you any questions because we have a list of things and you've already spoken. But thank you for presenting that. Clara is the next person, head of Melbury College, with 3 minutes. Is Clara there? Because I can't see you.
Chair, Carla hasn't joined the meeting.
She hasn't. Okay, well, that's another one for me. Okay. Right, so at this point, we'll open the floor to members of the panel. So does anyone want to speak? Right, Dennis, yeah.
So, Chair, could I possibly speak now, if that's okay?
Yes, okay. We'll do that before Dennis then. Go ahead.
Now?
Yes, go ahead, James.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I just wanted to pause and see what was said, and I just want to pay tribute to Helen for her advocacy and fighting hard for the nursery, and that's very important. But I want to pick up on a couple of things that were said. So we've heard that there will be a serious effect on the education of the young people. Well, the good news, Chair, is that there won't be, because officers have found other excellent provision, and we've heard this evening that there are spare places, and we've heard this evening that the birth rate is falling. So the good news is that won't happen in the local area, but the good thing is that there are plenty of good comparable facilities, and Helen pays tribute to the exceptional early years provision, and she's absolutely right, and I would support that, Chair. There is exceptional early years provision, and the video was great. I'm not quite sure where all the lines came from that were in the video, but those children's futures, Chair, are safeguarded thanks to the work that officers have done, and as Helen says, because of the exceptional early years. I do want to just pick up on a couple of points that Jane McSherry has been through for us tonight. The medical kids there are the most vulnerable that we have in the borough. And as councillors, we should be aware of that. Literally the most vulnerable, referred from CAMS, referred from hospitals, and in many cases, very severely unwell. We've only got places for half of them at the moment. So the most vulnerable kids in the borough are finding themselves at home without the emotional, educational, and morale boost of being in school. So we must remember that. Only half those places can be filled at the moment. The alternatives have been looked at, they don't work. The report tells us £1 million to provide 40 places, but we don't know what growth will be necessary, COVID-related growth. We also heard from Jane this evening that early years demand is dropping because of the fall in the birth rate, but we know as councillors that the secondary demand is rising. So therefore, on the face of it, we will need more of these medical places at the same time as we will need fewer nursery places. So Chair, it is tough. Absolutely, it's tough. But the decision we need to make this evening are based on the facts. And the facts, I think, have been laid out for us by Jane, that the need is great for the medical pupils who are the most vulnerable in the borough, and alternatives have been looked at. And the good thing is Lavender's done a great job. And again, I pay tribute to everybody who's advocating that campaign. But the officers have laid out clear facts tonight about provision, about vulnerability, about alternatives that have been looked at. And it's on those facts that we have to make the decision. And absolutely, I'm biased because I'm chair of governors, but I really would urge members to listen to what we're being told by officers and what the report says, and that we need to base our recommendations or our views on that. Chair, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, James. Now, Dennis, who else, please? Anyone? Nick? One minute. Who else?
I start.
Just 1 second. Anyone else? No. Okay. Councillor Pearce, please.
Okay, thank you. I've been on the council ever since the late 90s, and I've been involved on the education committee and all its predecessors. And I've found no matter what we do in education, all the changes we make, there are always groups that don't like what we're going to do. And I feel sorry for the parents of these young children, but I think that the priority is actually making more provision, as James said, for the most vulnerable children in this borough. And a lot of them, if they're in secondary education, they have got a time-limited amount of time to get what they need. Whereas my wife was a nursery nurse in a nursery for 20 years in this borough, and her one of her sort of key things was, if the parents are positive about what the children are having to do, i.e. change what they're doing, move to a different sort of location. If the parents are positive, the children are positive. And if we're going to get just as good provision when these children move to different provision to make way for this facility, I think that is a win-win. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Draper?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And I have to say before I start that I'm Vice Chair of Governors at Mulberry College. I'm Vice Chair to James Holmes's chair. So everything that James has said, effectively, I would agree with 100%. I'd like to echo what he was saying about Helen's excellent presentation. And please, for goodness sake, don't take this the wrong way. I thought the video was particularly beautiful, particularly affecting. And I thought to myself, if only the kids from the medical centre were in any way capable of making a video like that. And of course they're not. They have very severe problems, anxiety problems, mental health problems. Some of them have got physical problems like cancer and things like that. But they're kids like yours and mine. And they come from all over. Some of them might even have gone to this nursery when they were younger, and they haven't got somewhere to go. I've been a governor at the Smart Centre since it opened. Frankly, when it was first opened, the medical centre, for what it was just a room with some kids in it who weren't learning anything at all. And I've seen it evolve into something which has a proper structure, which has a proper teaching, which actually gives children who have got very severe problems a chance in life. And obviously, because they've had that chance in life, it's grown of its own accord. And it's now, as was presented, massively overcrowded. And they need better. It's not just a question of they deserve better, they need better. This is the way to do it. We've heard the maths, we've heard the costings. This, I'm afraid, has got to be how we do it. Thank you very much indeed, Chair, for letting me speak. And thank you again, Helen, for your presentation.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wanting to speak? Right, Councillor Makin, please.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation, Helen. It was very good, nice to see the children in that environment. However, I'm the chair of governors at Hazelmere Primary School, which is virtually next door to Lavender Fields, and we've got spaces in the nursery there, and we have for a number of years. And there's a few nurseries in Pollard Hill, Cricket Green area that have got loads of spaces in them. Enough for the children to stay in that area in some ways. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane, do you want to come back at all to say anything?
I don't think so, not at this point, Chair.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Henry. Councillor Henry, yes.
Thank you. And I would like to say thank you, Jane, for that, message in detail, because when it first went out, I opposed against it. The reason being because how it was delivered. And now that you explain in details what it's all about, it not only touched me, but it gave me a great sense of feelings for what our children have been going through. I remember days I used to work in nursing home, children's home. I worked at the Brightwell many years ago, if you know where Brightwell is in Morden, and I can understand where you're coming from. And I'm sure some of the parents who are now at Lavender, after listening to what you said, I think they will more agree with what you're saying and want to understand where you're coming from and where we're coming from as a council. And I am sure, we will find other places in the borough for children who are now at Lavender. The only thing I would like to say is that we want to ensure that these children, and I'll say 100% will support you and Councillor Stringer with this venture because it's well needed. Thank you.
Right, okay, I'll probably have the last word. I thank Jane for the full explanation and also Helen for what you've done with the young children. However, I did read all that paperwork and my background is health and childcare. So I'm not biased. My eyes are wide open. I've had a lot of dealings with young people with difficulties as well, and I know how stressful it can be. However, the consultation isn't finished. So I'm sure that what has been said will be taken on board as well. What I was very taken up with is the fact that it wasn't taken in isolation, but in fact, schools are nearby. Because when I first read and heard about it, I was a bit like Joan, and I wondered, what are we doing? Because I know all these different places as well. I've visited them in different times in the last 12 years. But as you read along, you realize it wasn't done blindly. A lot of things have been taken on board. And so therefore, I think we should just leave it for the consultation to run its course and for the officers to continue to do what's best for Merton children. And I'm sure they won't do it without consultation of the various people. So thank you all very much for what has been said. And for the passion in it. It's almost bring tears to your eyes, actually. Thank you so much. Okay. Right, okay, so we're going to move on now to, where are we? Performance monitoring. And I think that might be Hannah. Where is she? We lost her.
Hi, Chair. Chair, if I can go straight, we've got Carl. Have we got Carl? We have Carl. Yes. To take us through the main points, and then we'll take any questions as asked. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Chair, you rather surprised me. If you give me 1 minute to just so that I can get my paper up, and I'll be with you in 1 second. Apologies.
Okay, we'll have a breather.
Thank you. Okay, by way of introduction then, so members of this panel will be familiar with the format. This is the regular performance update that this panel receives, and you have the actual dashboard itself with the indicators on, and a cover report which gives you a little bit more detail on the on any indicators that may have changed in the reporting period, or indeed any indicator that is showing as red. One thing I'd like to highlight this time is that we have taken on board, I think, the desire of this panel, and I remember distinctly the helpful challenge from Councillor Holmes in particular around providing more analysis, so to move away from where we can from a sort of descriptive way of presenting the data to provide a little bit more analysis and understanding for this panel in terms of some of these indicators. And I hope that members of this panel recognise that in the cover report we have provided a little bit more understanding around some of the performance variation we're seeing in relation to our single assessment timeliness, and also some of the contextual information around the timeliness of care proceedings. We've also indicated, provided a little bit more contextual information about some indicators that don't necessarily have a target attached, but where they're attached to them, but where there is changes and variation in what we're seeing. And this is in particular in relation to the number of children subject to a child protection plan, where we have seen a significant increase since the first lockdown in March, and also a particular sort of data variation in relation to the number of children looked after. And we've provided some contextual information there to help the panel understand, or to share, I guess, our understanding of what is happening there. So I'll stop there really, and as is customary, Chair, I'll happy, together with Jane and Elle and Hannah, to respond to any queries that members of this panel may have.
Right, okay. Any questions from anyone, please? No? I hope we're still awake. Hayley, I'm surprised. You're not asking anything tonight?
No, I actually think that Carl's actually pretty much, responded within his report, to be honest with you, any highlight factors. So I don't feel there is on this occasion, to be honest with you. And thank you for a good report again, Carl.
That's great. Yeah, this is what happens when we all listen to each other, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody else wants to ask anything either, I take it. No? James? No?
No, thank you, Chair. You're just checking I was here, were you? But no.
Okay. Right, okay, then we really have time on our hands. So we'll move swiftly on to departmental updates. And I presume that's going to be you, Hannah. I presume. I don't know.
So I'm again going to hand over, Chair. I seem to be on a roll this evening.
Yes.
So I think what we will do is, if we start with, you will get a presentation on your screen. What we've tried to do is keep this as much up to date as we possibly can for you. It is detailed, but I think, so what we will do tonight is focus on the key points for you, and again, open it up, of course, to any questions. So I think we have got Jane up first on schools and education, and then Elle on children's social care and youth inclusion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who is speaking?
Have I lost Jane?
No, I'm just on mute. I'm sorry about that. So what I was going to do, working on the assumption that people had a chance to have a look at the slides. So I guess I just wanted to update a few things. So obviously, schools are looking to the reopening and the implications. So we've been told there'll be a 2 weeks notice, it's been promised by the government. And obviously the first date for that is the 8th of March. So schools are very much looking ahead to what that might look like. And secondary schools are also waiting for the government decisions about exam processes this summer. So there's several things in a sense that they're waiting for. It certainly would be true to say, and I think we flagged it up before, but the strains of managing the remote education as well as the face-to-face provision continue to take their toll, and head teachers are reporting that staff are really tired. So the half-term holiday is very welcome. In terms of the asymptomatic testing with the lateral flow devices, we've had very few positive tests coming from the secondary programme, and likewise in primary. And as Dagmar flagged, positive cases in schools have dropped somewhat over the last couple of weeks, although we have had a couple of schools where staff absence has led to some difficulties. Around remote learning, the MEPs are focusing on the remote education quality this term, using the expectations set by the government and the self-evaluation tool to support schools. And feedback so far indicates that all schools are developing their provision. There's an increased number of hours being offered in line with government expectations, and increased amounts of live sessions and teaching being offered. Just thought I'd give you a quick update on the attendance on site as of the 8th of February. So across Merton, all pupils, 14.6% on site, 14.9 is the national average, so pretty much in line. Children with education, health and care plans, 34.9% on site. Again, the national average is 36. And children with a social worker, 41.6%, where the national average is 43%. And the attendance of those last two groups has improved over the last few weeks. And nationally, about 33% of pupils in special schools are attending face-to-face, and we've got 35% in Cricket Green, 23.8 in Persade, and 21.6 in Melrose. As we flagged before, so 34%, 34.9% of EHCPs attending on site in mainstream schools. So if we go to the next slide. So I don't think there was anything more I particularly wanted to update on that one. And then the next one, Carl. So I think the only thing to say in terms of the feedback from children and young people that I just wanted to flag up is that we are looking to do a quite full and systematic survey of our young people, particularly around preparing what we might want to do, preparing for recovery. And so we are have been talking to our schools and also to colleagues in the voluntary sector to be planning for that quite systematic piece of work, and then we'll be working with our young inspectors to put that in place. So we'll keep you updated on that as we move forward. And I think that's probably all the specific updates from me, so I'll hand over to Elle.
Thank you, Jane. So in relation to children's social care and youth inclusion, all of our services continue to be delivered, albeit some of them are being delivered in alternative and new ways that we have taken on board and adapted to during the course of the pandemic. We are working out which children we see face to face and which children we can continue and to safely support virtually by undertaking risk assessments for every child. So those are all in place. We have our personal advisors who support our care experience young people, having more frequent virtual contact with those young people to make sure that they are well and supported and have access to the things that they need. As Jane has already touched on, our social workers are promoting school attendance of vulnerable children, and we're participating in regular internal panels with education colleagues to help to support those children who would like to be in school and who aren't in school into school by removing barriers and increasing support for them. We've continued to supply the DFE devices and routers to those children who need access to IT to be able to both do their remote learning, but also to remain in contact with social workers in the professional network. We've increased the allowances that we provide to our care experienced young people to help them meet increased costs, and we continue to provide additional financial assistance to that group of young people as need determines. We've done work with our local police colleagues to get their support for social workers to undertake parts of their role with children, young people and families in the community to help with social distancing, and upon a display of their Merton Council employee badge, police officers will take, they won't take enforcement action where social workers are undertaking their duties with children and young people in the community. We're working with our CCG and health colleagues to make sure that health visiting support for babies and young children is in place and is helpful to those families. And we're liaising closely with Safer Merton colleagues and also police colleagues to keep an eye on what's happening regarding domestic abuse reports across Merton. And I'm pleased to report that they have remained steady and consistent with the previous year. So we're not seeing a particular issue as a result of the lockdown in relation to domestic abuse at the moment. However, what we have seen in children's social care is an increase in the total number of children that are being supported by the system of just over 200 children. That's in comparison to the same period last year. And the most significant rise that we've had is children who are requiring support for children in need. You'll see on the chart on the second of the children's social care slides that the numbers of children with a child in need plan is higher than has been the case in Merton for the last 2 years. We've also seen a significant increase during the period of the pandemic, so since March 2020, in the number of children who are being supported with a child protection plan. Although the level of children with a child protection plan is still lower than the number of children we had on a child protection plan 2 years ago. The social work workforce and foster carers are eligible for, and they have been receiving both the vaccine and regular testing. All of our social workers who are undertaking face-to-face essential visits are provided with a full pack of PPE for them to use to protect both themselves and also to protect residents. We've got specific practice guidance in place for all of our social workers and practitioners to help to support them with safe and risk-assessed interventions. You might remember that we mentioned in the departmental update last month that we had got some significant absence through COVID infection and isolation in our frontline assessment social work teams, and that has now started to rectify itself with members of staff recovering and coming back into work. However, we were also seeing higher numbers of our social work staff who are experiencing bereavements as a result of COVID-19, and that's also having an impact on attendance and their welfare. We've got an increased number of children that individual social workers are currently responsible for, and that relates to that increased number of children in the system that I mentioned previously. So coupled with some of the staff absences and personal bereavements, there is some fatigue and tiredness in the children's social care workforce. We've temporarily redeployed some of our qualified social workers who have quality assurance roles into our frontline assessment team to undertake some assessments and essential visits to children so that we make sure that we see and we assess and keep safe children in Merton. And as a result, some of the work that they normally undertake to overview some of the work that we do in children's social care has been temporarily suspended. We've, as we mentioned last time, we have secured some additional temporary resource to bolster social work staffing capacity and some management capacity. The management capacity resource is now in place and we are recruiting, albeit slightly more slowly than we would want to, because there is a pan-London pressure for social workers at the moment, but we are recruiting some additional social workers to assist with social workers' caseloads as well. The senior leadership team are monitoring staff welfare and their well-being very closely. We have a selection of check-ins and touch points with staff. We're promoting the employee assistance programme, and I myself hold a fortnightly keeping in touch for the whole service. Last week, we had our practice week, which is where senior leaders spend some time alongside our frontline practitioners and teams, provides us with an opportunity to talk to staff, see what they're doing with residents, and to have a window into the impact of our interventions with children and families. And we focused that last week on celebration and well-being so that staff could talk about all of the great things that they are doing and share that with their colleagues, and we could have some learning about the way that we have adapted our practice to respond to the pandemic. We are still continuing with our recovery and transformation plans. So some of the projects that we have been working on during the pandemic are now coming to fruition. We've got new transformation plans that we are starting at the moment, and we are recruiting staff, and we're lining up resources to take those further forward. We've completed some of our work that we're going to be consulting partners and young people on to look at how we offer our support across children's social care and the range of early help partners. We're doing work with our Mosaic electronic case recording system to repair and improve that. And we have got ongoing work with the West London Family Courts to deal with the and progress the current backlog in care proceedings so that we can secure permanency for children and young people. We're continuing to provide virtual training for our staff so that they remain skilled and supported to undertake their role and can maintain their registration as social workers. And we have adjusted our quality assurance programme to make sure that we take account of the redeployment of our quality assurance staff, but at the same time have assurance and governance processes in place so that we know that the quality of intervention we're providing is good and is meeting children's needs.
Thank you very much. And I should say thank you to Jane, Carl, and Ellie. Anyone has a question or any questions? Oh, okay, 2 seconds. So Dennis, who's the next person? Somebody else put their hand up. Oh, Russell. And James. Yes, I thought so. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh yeah, Nick. Any more? No, okay. So if we could have Dennis, please, first, followed by Russell and then James.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I understand how difficult this must be, but I have a couple, 2 or 3 questions, not in any particular order, I'm afraid. The child social care, the 211 comparison rise with last year, do we anticipate that rise after lockdown ends and schools take on the full complement? Do we anticipate that rising, leveling off, or do we think that things will, and how long do you think, or will that continue basically, that rise, or will it decrease as we get over this, and how long do you anticipate that might last? The other one is about school transports. Now, in line with government guidelines, there is a lower percentage of children on the school transport. But does that mean that most of the other children are staying at home, or does it mean they're finding their own way, their parents are finding ways to get to the provision individually? And do we anticipate the same thing when lockdown is over and schools start to reopen fully, that parents will continue to have the need to take their own children to school rather than taking advantage of the school transport? I'll leave it there, 2's enough.
Right, thank you. Russell, please.
Right. My 2 questions relate to remote learning. Has every child got access to a computer now? Do we know? And if not, why not? And do they also have Wi-Fi access? Which is what I mean. You could give people a computer, but if they haven't got Wi-Fi, they've got really, there's not much point to have it. And have we any strategies to put in place about mental health when the children go back, so that because that's becoming a big issue. Because my daughter's 28 and she's suffering at the moment because her work is closed.
Right, okay, thanks. James, please. James.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an excellent report as always, and a lot of hard work going on in very challenging times. So my question is not in any sense a criticism, it is exceptional times, but I also spotted the extra 211 children for needing social care. I spotted the comment about attendance at the schools being higher than the last lockdown, higher than expected. And also I spotted the comments about staff being down in some cases. So whilst we all know it's exceptional times, and certainly I feel very supportive of all the work that officers are doing, it would just as a panel, I think it would be helpful just to have a short idea, short in terms of length of time, but a small idea of some of the challenges that are being faced, because we have heard this evening about recruitment, etc. But there must be areas where you as senior officers are quite worried, and providing it's not breaching any confidentiality, I think as a panel it's important to understand where the challenges are. At the moment we've heard how well they're being coped with, but it would be good to hear a little bit more about where you are worried and where we are falling down. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome, thank you. Can we have those answered, please, by anyone from the team?
So shall I pick up? So I think so Councillor Pearce had a question about school transport. So I think the numbers being lower are because there are fewer children in school. So there's only about 35% of our children with education, health and care plans who are in school. So that is the reason for the lower number being transported. And we had the same situation, if you like, in the first lockdown, fewer children being transported, and then it goes back up to the normal levels, more normal levels when they return to school. So we're not anticipating that once all children return to school, those numbers will be lower, it will be back to normal. And the reasons why children are not in school are various in terms of children with EHCP. Some of them maybe because for medical needs we do have some children who are shielding and not at home. We will have some parents who've made the decision they don't want to take up that place, they would rather keep their children at home, and the remote learning is working for them. So there'll be a number of reasons why they're not there, but no, we wouldn't expect it to stay lower.
Okay.
Do you want me to carry on round with my bits, Chair?
Yes,
Try and answer all those. Councillor Makin asked a question about remote learning. So I think, no, we couldn't guarantee you that every child who needs a laptop has one at this point. That will be for a mixture of reasons. So some of our schools, particularly primary schools, have families who didn't want laptops the first time round, and they have provided really good packs of work for families to take home. And you're absolutely right that some of that was around the Wi-Fi and maintaining that Wi-Fi access. So certainly we've been working with schools around the money that the council set aside to find out whether they wanted devices or whether they wanted Wi-Fi access. So we've and the same with some of the charities that we've been working with have been providing dongles rather than devices, because that's what is needed. I think also it's been the case that there were some children who had laptops, either the original DFE laptops or other laptops they were using, that now have either broken or aren't adequate. So we certainly know that we've got, from our secondary perspective, pupils who are now getting 5 hours of live streaming a day. That requires a different sort of spec of device to be able to manage that and do all their homework. So there's some additional need coming into the system. So that's why we know that there are a number of families who still need, children and families who still need those devices. So hopefully that answered your question. In terms of the increasing mental health needs, yes, I think we are really aware that that's an issue, and that was definitely picked up and planned for by schools before children returned after the first lockdown, and very aware that that's going to be an issue for children and lots of the conversations we're having, and in fact in our conversations also with the DfE around the catch-up programs, are actually our children and young people are going to need as much time to catch up around their emotional and mental health needs when they get back into school, as they will do with their with their academic studies. And certainly last time our head teachers spent a lot of time planning for how they would support children to be able to manage that coming back into school, and we're very concerned about their well-being. The other thing we are just about to do with our schools and local authority partnership Attain is start looking for that recovery planning and what's going to be needed in the medium to longer term around young people's mental health needs. So it's very high on the sort of agenda of our thinking and the thinking of our senior leaders in schools. And then Councillor Holmes, I think your question was around attendance, but I'm not exactly sure. But I think it was around what are we worried about? We probably still remain. We're still working really hard to make sure that we get as many children in school as who should be there. So I think as both myself and Elle have said, we know there are some children who would be better off in school, and we're working hard to get them there. But we couldn't say every child we would like to be in school is in school. Also, we're aware that there are some children who we may have felt, and schools may have felt initially, were coping really well at home, and now are probably needing to come into school and have a place. So we know that some of our schools are, for example, working with some of our, because we have less children in secondary provision, but are working with some of those children and young people saying, actually, can we provide a place for you in school because we can see you're not logging on or not being able to access provision. So, and I guess if you were asking what my other concern would be, it's about, I guess, keeping both for our own staff and staff in school morale up and that energy up, because actually we know that once schools, this is going on, and once schools return, they're going to need a burst of energy then to manage all that. So that would be my concerns, I suppose, is that people can keep up the, putting in the amount of effort and energy they have been, and to keep doing that over an extended period. And I'll hand over to Elle.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, so coming to Councillor Pearce's question about the rise, do we think it will continue to rise? Do we think it will plateau and reduce? What do we think will happen at the end of this lockdown period? We don't know. What we are seeing in January is we are seeing a plateauing off of the numbers of children who are in need and the number of children who are on a child protection plan. What we don't know at the moment is whether that is because we've gone into another national lockdown, or whether that is because it's reached a particular point where it is plateauing. So we're continuing to watch that very, very carefully. What we saw in the first lockdown period is that referrals for children in April, May and June were lower than they would usually be for that period of time. And then we saw an increase in referrals in the summer months. What we're currently seeing for January of this year is actually that those referrals have stayed at a very similar level. So we haven't seen them reduce in the same way as they did in the first national lockdown. We think that is because, one, the community and partners are now more used to working in pandemic and lockdown conditions, and also because you have heard that there are more children, more vulnerable children who are going to school during this period of lockdown in comparison to the first lockdown, and therefore those children and families are continuing to have the support and the oversight that they would otherwise have had. So we are hypothesizing that as we get towards the end of this current lockdown, that we won't see the same surge that we saw at the end of the last one, but we do think that we will see a slight uptick as more children obviously return and go back to school. What we're doing to keep an eye on that is that I've got 2 of my heads of service who are working together to track and review very closely all of the children who have got a child protection plan, so that we make sure that only those children who need to be on a child protection plan stay on a child protection plan, and as soon as we can safely step them down to other services, we're able to do that. So if I can then come on to the question that Councillor Holmes had about what we're also looking at for those group, or the reasons why we've got that increase of children in the system. There's two parts to that. So when we look at the total number of new children who have entered the children's social care system in this performance year, actually the number is the same in total as the number of children who entered the system for the same period last year. However, because we had that lower level of children being referred and entering the system during the first lockdown, it's meant that that number of children who have come in in a very condensed and short period of time. And the way that our services are structured, we have sufficient resource to meet that regular level of demand, but actually the service hasn't got spare capacity, so that when demand increases or surges for a long period of time, or in a condensed way as it's done since we came out of the first lockdown, then it is more challenging for the system to accommodate and respond to that. The other challenge that we've got is that where we have completed our intervention with families, we make arrangements to step those families down into early help support in the community, or with their wider family, or within their own social networks. And the challenge with the social distancing arrangements and the series of restrictions that we've had over the course of the last year is that the opportunities to safely step families out of the children's social care system are much more limited, and that means that it's taking longer for us to complete a period of intervention with families and be able to identify community and early help resources to help them to exit the children's social care system. And then the third issue that we've got is that the way that children's social work intervention happens is through the work that the social worker does with individual children and families, and it's the work that happens in that relationship and that space between the social worker and the family that affects the change. So children's social work, other than for children with disabilities, where we would provide support or care packages to help those children, or to help parents to care for those children, but for children who are in need or in need of protection, it's the social worker's direct work that makes the difference, that helps parents to make changes, to care and keep their children safe. And although we are able to continue to do social work visits to children and families, one of the things that is a real challenge for us throughout this entire pandemic is social workers being able to spend significant amounts of time with children and families to do that very detailed, intimate, difficult work with parents and families to secure the change. So what we're seeing is that families are staying in our system for longer than they would have done prior to the pandemic, because it is taking longer to do that kind of intervention with families. So those cumulative issues is what underpins that additional number of children in our system. So our hypothesis is that when we get to a point that the pandemic and the restrictions have settled, and there are less restrictions, and there is less requirement for community resources to be operating in different ways, that it will probably take us about, we estimate about 6 months for that swell in the system to move out, as we're able then to start to operate in a more similar way to the way that we would have operated before the pandemic. But that's just our hypothesis at the moment about how long we think it would take to do those pieces of work to help to exit families from the system. So I hope I've answered everybody's questions there.
Chair, if I can just add very, very quickly, just in relation to the workforce and the workforce well-being, we are on the 3rd lockdown and it does take its toll. 2 things in the system that's really important to the well-being of our staff, but also the morale of our staff, is that all of the frontline critical social worker posts and special schools teaching support staff has been offered the vaccine. And I can tell you the uptake has been really high among children's schools and families frontline workers. And that has been received and greatly appreciated from our frontline workers. And the second part, just to assure the panel, is that we have got a robust wellbeing programme, confidential self-referral wellbeing programme for all of our staff. And that is continuously being updated with the challenges of kind of the 3rd lockdown and the new variants and the worry around this phase of living with COVID. I also spend a lot of time in the office because I've got all frontline staff in there, not just in children's schools and families, but also in community and housing. So we do check in on them and we make sure they have access to their managers, that they get that support. Working from home, technology has been amazing, but I know a lot of our staff do miss the socialisation aspect of the office as well, and that is totally understandable. So I just wanted to raise those points. Thank you, Chair.
I think you read my mind, Hannah, because I've written here that I'm forward and upward looking, that you are as a team, and that the well-being of your staff seems to be first and foremost in your thoughts. Without that, you won't be helping anybody, to be honest. And so I can cross that off now and go on to the 3 people to come. Hayley, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. I'll keep them very brief. I think they're probably all to Elle based on her presentation material. Elle, you mentioned domestic abuse had remained steady compared to last year, which obviously no domestic abuse is by any means acceptable. But I'm just wondering, I'm a bit surprised that it is comparable, pretty much the same to last year. I'm just wondering how confident you are that that is a true picture, because I would have thought that it would be different. The next question is on social workers. Since I've actually been a counsellor, there's always been a struggle to recruit social workers, so that's a while now. And I'd like to offer a suggestion ask a question and a suggestion in terms of what does the council do to try to recruit newly qualified social workers, in terms of targeting universities or colleges, in terms of those who are actually coming out, because I understand it is a London-wide problem, but it's just in terms of, why should Merton be the one, that those newly qualified social workers would want to choose. And my third question is probably, I should know this, but I can't remember, but for the Department for Education devices, are they available to primary schools, or is it just secondary? Thank you.
And can we do 2 more before you start answering, please? Nick, Councillor Draper.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's a very quick one. I just to say that I've been helping out at Cricket Green with their lateral flow testing, and if I never hear a teacher retch again, I shall be a happy man. But I've got to say, the commitment of the teaching staff to doing that twice a week, and to doing it, not just doing it, but doing it happily. And I'm sure when I talk about, I'm not just talking about Cricket Green School, I'm talking about the social workers as well, every team member who's actually doing this just to keep our systems going and to keep our children educated. Fabulous. We should be so proud of the staff who work at Merton. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Henry, please.
Right. Ellie had answered one of my questions. I was going to ask about, first of all, I would like to say thank you to all the officers for the reports, and, you know, thanks for all the support that everyone have been giving to our children and us also. Right. Ellie answered my question. I was going to have, one of my questions was going to ask about referral, but she went into details with that. A resident asked me to ask whether or not they need to return the devices that they receive, for example, laptop, iPhones, and, you know, whatever they receive after, the children receive after the lockdown. So they want to know if they have to keep it or they need to return it back to the council. I say, I don't know, we'll ask for them. My next question is, as we know, during the lockdown, it's very difficult for parents, and we have been issuing free school meal. And as a former foster carer, I know what it is like when you have children, and especially they are at home all the time, the fridge open, everything going. What extra support are in place for foster school meal also, or do they receive any extra financial support? Thanks.
Okay, those three, please. I'm not sure who's going to answer, but anyone can.
Okay, well, I'll start if I may, Chair. So in relation to Councillor Ormrod's question about domestic abuse, so the information about domestic abuse is provided to us by our local police colleagues, and the figures that I'm referring to is in relation to the domestic abuse during this lockdown period in comparison with the same period last year. So the information that I've had is that the domestic abuse rates across the Southwest London command footprint have been variable across the boroughs, and there are some of our neighbours who have seen increases, some have seen decreases, and for Merton, I am informed that it has stayed consistent with the period last year.
Elle, can I just ask you on that? It's a question of confidence in the figures, to be honest with you. I mean, pretty much in terms of, do we feel that people aren't reporting? I do understand where the figures come from. I think it's more in terms of, you know, in terms of with your role, how confident are you with that people are actually reporting it, to be honest with you?
So I'm confident in the information that the police have given us about the reported crime, and I think that because across the Southwest London footprint we have got the same type of comms and social media campaigns, and we've got some similar arrangements in place, and given that the police are reporting to me that there is some variation in terms of some boroughs have got an increase and some have got a decrease, I'm confident that it's not about people not reporting, although we do know in relation to domestic abuse crimes that there is an underreporting across the board, but I've got no reason to think that specifically for Merton there is a problem with more underreporting or non-reporting than would usually be the case. So I don't think that the current lockdown is impacting. I've got no information that suggests that that's the case.
Okay.
In terms of the recruitment of newly qualified social workers, so we have some initiatives that we already have in place in children's social care. So we are part of the Frontline programme, which is run by the Frontline organisation with support from the Department for Education. We already have and have had for a number of years a small team of student social workers through that route who go on to take up employed roles with us when they finish finish their training. We've got some plans in progress at the moment to increase that to 2 units of frontline social workers, so that we can double the number of student social workers that come through that route, and therefore double the number of social workers that we recruit. And you'll see in my update slides that I mentioned that the work on a proposed reorganisation of some aspects of children's social care has reached a conclusion, and we're shortly going to be moving to a consultation with our staff around that, and included in that proposal are some arrangements to strengthen how we support newly qualified social workers and student social workers, so that we are able to enhance our supply of newly qualified social workers, our support to them, and also to develop how we can grow our own social workers as well. We're also looking at how we could use some of the apprenticeship schemes and funding to further support that as well. So I hope that answers your question about newly qualified social worker recruitment. In relation to devices, I think there are so there's 2 parts to that. So for the devices that have been provided for children in particular year groups at schools, I think Jane can probably answer some of those aspects, and I'll let her do that. But in relation to the devices that are provided for vulnerable children with a social worker, they are provided to help children and families maintain contact with social workers and their professional network who are supporting those. And so those devices are not limited by age or which particular part of the education system those children are in. So if I can give you some reassurance that any children with a social worker are entitled to some support with a device.
Is that it? Joan, okay. Jane, were you going to say something?
I was, yes. So in answer to Councillor Honour's question about the primary or secondary, yes, DFE devices are available to primary and secondary schools. So yes, they can ask for those, and there's just some for some targeted schools, some more have just been released. In terms of the devices and whether they're on loan, yes, they are on loan from the school. And so the expectation, I don't think there's going to be a collecting them in as soon as lockdown finishes, because I think that I guess schools will be prepared for the fact there could be another lockdown, but also young people will need those if bubbles close, if the bubble that they're in, the support bubble closes. But yes, they are so they are on loan from the school, with the expectation that once a child had worked their way right through that school, the school would have that device back to be available for another child. So that's the way it's set up, and my understanding is that's the same for the devices for children in children's social care, that they are effectively on loan. That's how, and that also means that the children and families are then supported in terms of those devices being able to be repaired if something goes wrong with them.
Yeah, so for children with a social worker, the devices are on loan, but not through the schools. They're on loan through the council, and we're currently funding an IT system support program for those children and families should they have any issues with their devices or the software on those devices.
Okay. Yeah, so that's the benefit really of them being on loan, is that then the repair of those devices and replacements.
Thank you very much. Anyone else before I ask the questions I want? Oh, yes, Hannah.
Here, just to add, I'm picking up on an earlier question around the universities and newly qualified social workers in training. We are in a teaching partnership with Kingston University. And we're working quite closely with them to see how we can build and develop that across the system. We've also agreed a set of standards for the apprenticeship standards that we're looking to spread right across all the different social work roles across the council. But yes, there is a very well established teaching partnership with Kingston University and the Borough. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much. Now I want to ask, there are probably 3 small questions. I used to be a magistrate in the family court, and I know that there's 26 weeks for adoption, and we had to work really hard or we get a real telling off from the Chief Justice. With all of what's happening now, I'm sure you can't keep to that. Have they changed the protocol? And so that's one question. There are 2 more. One is, I've got a almost 8-year-old grandson who is really worried about transition because he's wondering about his friends, and he's really, in fact, he's depressing himself the way he's behaving about it. He's being allowed now to phone them. He probably feel a little bit better. But he's really worried that he won't be able to mix with the ones who were in the other class and now they've gone, and everybody is getting really worried about it. Are you doing anything at all, online or anywhere, to assist these young children so they don't feel as if they've been let down, locked away, whatever it is? And because I feel sorry for him, but there's not much I can do about it. And free school vouchers, is there a good take up on them? Because I know that sometimes when there were vouchers in the primary school, some people wouldn't take them because they didn't want anyone to know they're having vouchers. So how is it happening? Has it been working? Thank you.
So, Chair, if I can just take your first question about the 26 weeks and the care proceedings.
Yeah.
So the 26 weeks, as you rightly say, is actually in legislation, and so the courts are still striving to meet the 26 weeks, but there are significant challenges, and they're not at the moment nationally, and that is because of court closures and then court availability in terms of the social distancing measures that those courts then need to implement. And so we are working closely with the West London Family Court to look at how we schedule and prioritise children's cases for hearing and progression through, so that we can conclude those and secure permanency for children. But it is fair to say that at the moment we're not achieving 26 weeks in those care proceedings, and that is the national picture. The Family Justice Service have the President of the Family Court recognises this as an issue. CAFCAS recognises this as an issue, and in the summer and then updated again in November of last year, has published a Road to Recovery document to look at developments that are taking place within the court system in terms of introducing virtual court hearings and thinking about how they prioritise and make court proceedings more time efficient, but also balancing justice and fairness to parents, so that actually we can get that timescale for children back on track, and we can secure permanency for those most vulnerable children who are currently waiting.
Thank you.
So shall I pick up the other 2? So in terms of the vouchers, yes, we've had really good take up of the vouchers. They have been popular throughout, and we also over the winter and for half term have extended that through the winter grant scheme to under 5s as well, so to nursery age people, and a really good take up there as well. So I would say yes, it has been really popular. In terms of the preparation, the transition, and I'm assuming, Chair, you're referring to the transition back into school.
School and classes, changing of.
Yes. Yeah. So I think both last time when we did lockdown and this time, I know that schools are already thinking and planning about that. I think the 2-week lead in this time that the government have promised is going to be really helpful, because it means actually that then schools can be doing something, and they're already planning what actively they're going to do within those 2 weeks to prepare children for coming back. We've certainly had reports that some of the live lessons and the for primary schools, some of the sort of group engagement that's been with the improved remote learning has really helped. in terms of children feeling they are in touch and they can talk to their classmates. So yes, it's really high on the agenda of our schools. They are really concerned about the return to school being something that happens effectively and well for children and young people. And last time, and I know they will this time, they planned for that first week or two back in to have opportunities for children to talk about their experiences and what had happened. Obviously, children will return, they will have had family members who've been very ill, or they may have been bereaved. They would have, as you said, felt quite isolated. So the opportunity to talk about that, and that certainly is something they focused on quite heavily on the return last time. So certainly not an expectation that children will be in sitting down getting on with lessons without thinking about that well-being. Yes.
Good. Right, thank you. Right, okay. I think we've come to the end. Apart from the members of the panel have to stay back because of the worksheets, but that won't take long. So thank you all very much indeed for all the work you put into. I don't know how you manage it, but you're doing very well, and we appreciate it. And you heard from almost everyone, if not everyone, and we really do appreciate it. And I know that when you talk to families, and in spite of the fact that young children feel a little bit lonely, quite a few of them are learning new skills on those IT things. They're meeting up with groups and learning to sing and play music and doing all sorts of things they wouldn't normally do. So it's probably not all bad. But thank you very, very much indeed. And for all this work that you prepare and for listening to us. Have a very good night. Right, it's panel now for the worksheet. So those who want to go can go, because you don't want to hear the panel, I shouldn't think. The worksheets. So, Stella. There is Stella.
Yes, Chair.
Right, okay. I couldn't see that there was anything to change on the sheets. Have you got anything to add?
No, Chair, just to say that I'll be working. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just to say that I'll work alongside yourself and officers to finalise the agenda for the last meeting.
Okay.
There might be some changes if that's okay with the panel.
Right. Okay. Yes, Dennis. Can't hear you. That's it.
I see, as I've been put back as chair of school standards, I know exactly the problem. I'm wondering how a school standards report can be presented in a rational way when all the children are suffering in different ways, and home learning is not the same as being in school. My daughter has worked for 15 years at Ursuline, and one of her jobs has been pastoral care, and she's basically telling me that different children have totally different reactions to what we're going through. So how I mean, this is all, I don't need an answer. I'm just wondering how we're going to rationalise this year's report.
Can I come in, Chair? So it will have to have a very different format, because, as you know, normally the format would be that we look at the results year on year as well as looking. So we are looking at a completely different format that looks at a summary of what has been going on during the year, and will obviously reflect the year that we've had and the work that schools have been doing. So yes, expect a different format, but we haven't completely sorted what that's going to look like yet.
Yeah, and I'd also, may I just say one thing? I think, following up on what Brenda has said, I think we must, as councillors, thank all the staff for the amount of work they've done, the risks they've taken, and everything else to keep the system running.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So, if that's all, then we must just wish everyone a safe and restful night. And thank you all very